Hello, my name is Carolyn Traeger-Kleiman, and I have the privilege of serving as a professor of practice with Arizona State University. Thank you so much for joining us for this timely dialogue about the youth-serving workforce. The youth-serving workforce includes educators, student success coaches, AmeriCorps members, mentors, athletic coaches, tutors, and so much more. These individuals support learners across settings and are playing a critical role in ensuring a community vitality at a moment of transformation for our country. A few technical notes before we begin. First, if you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function to share any questions. We will do our best to get to as many as possible. We will be sharing the recording and the slides following today's event. To make the most of your time today, we are thrilled to be joined by Jason G. Green, who will set the context for this critical dialogue. We will then hear from two extraordinary panels made up of scholars, practitioners, and policy professionals, each connected to the youth-serving workforce, and each individual at a different phase of their career trajectory. All of this work is grounded in ASU's commitment to taking responsibility for the individuals they serve and how those individuals succeed. And as we've engaged in this work, we've really leaned into Mary Lou Fulton College's mission to co-create, collaborate, and take action to improve education for all learners. As our Dean Carol Basile says, youth-serving professionals are a critical part of the education ecosystem. And through our collaborative work, we can design systems that honor human variability and create the conditions for both young people and those who serve them. Our ultimate vision for this initiative is that the youth-serving workforce is a fully integrated component of reimagined learning ecosystems built for an AI-infused world. We hope that the skill required to guide young people across numerous settings will not only be recognized, but also appropriately resourced. As we embark upon this work, we acknowledge our incredible youth-serving workforce advisory board that has worked with us throughout this year, teaching us and shaping the work that we are embarking upon today. We also acknowledge the numerous scholars, practitioners, and policy professionals who are leading youth-serving initiatives in communities across this country. We look forward to collaborating with each and every one of you, and we thank you for joining us today. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce a public sector leader, community organizer, venture capitalist, and author, Jason G. Green.
Good afternoon. How are we doing? So good to see this room, lively, beautiful faces, all the people that are here on Zoom. Just deeply appreciative, humbled to get to be a part of this conversation. And Lauren was just asking me, Jason, what is it that you do? And I said, I do what Carolyn tells me to do. And so it has served me well. And so I'm grateful that in this instance, it's brought me into this room. I think we should all take a moment to just appreciate and say thank you to ASU for giving us this beautiful space and creating the physical space, but also the space to have this conversation. And so just deeply appreciative for that taking place, Carolyn. Thank you. You know, when I was a kid, my grandmother would take me with her when she would volunteer on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not too far from here, at a place called Asbury Methodist Village. I was 5 years old. I got dropped off at my grandparents' house after school. And so we would go there. And I don't think she thought that she was teaching me some profound lesson about workforce development, about civics, about community building. No, it was just, I had to be with her, and I was grateful to be with my grandmother. But I got to watch her sit with people late in life, and she would give them this gift of dignity. And it showed me how you can make someone else's life better just by being present. And so through her example, I decided to pursue a life of service, culminating in 4.5 years as Associate White House Counsel to President Obama. And each day, I would sort of carry her motto with me. She would say, "We're not here to save someone. We're here to serve someone." And years later, I found myself back at that Asbury Methodist Village. This time, I wasn't there with my grandmother. I was there for my grandmother. At 95 years old, the woman who had once brought me through those doors was now a patient. And so I got to sit with her and offer her those same gifts of dignity that I'd watched her give so many others. And I got to learn our history and to learn my story and to learn her story. And I did what so many of you would do when you learn. You shared what you learned. And so I came across some young people that attended my alma mater, Quince Orchard High School, again, not too far from where we are right now. And I shared what I learned. I talked about the story of Quince Orchard. I talked about how my great-grandparents had helped found that community in 1868, where they built a schoolhouse and a church, a cemetery plot for $54. And to my surprise, those young people, they said, "Hey, we want to help you preserve that history. We didn't know that story, but we want to be a part of that story." And I said, "Can we come along with you? Can we figure out how we can connect to that history?" Now, they weren't sure what that meant, and honestly, neither was I. But what started with some curious students eventually became a project to preserve local history and serve the community. And one day, I brought those students back with me to Asbury. Standing there, watching them interact with the residents, including my 95-year-old grandmother, I realized that I wasn't creating a new experience. I was repeating one. My grandmother had taken me. Now I was taking them. And perhaps someday they'll take someone else. We often talk about young people as if they're shaped by programs. But young people are shaped by people. They're shaped by the coach who sees potential before they do, the mentor who refuses to give up on them, the teacher who challenges them. In the language of today's conversation, we call this the youth serving workforce. But long before it was a workforce, it was simply what healthy communities did. Now, as I've traveled the country talking about my book, Too Precious to Lose, people often ask what surprised me the most while researching and writing it. And the answer is, it's simple. Again and again, I've discovered that none of the stories, these extraordinary stories, are about extraordinary individuals. They're about ordinary people who decided that they were responsible for one another. My ancestors, my great-great-grandparents, they helped build this community of Pleasant View and of Quince Orchard in 1868, but they didn't do it because they had resources. They built it and they preserved it because they felt accountable to something larger than themselves. There was one woman who I remember growing up, Miss Emma. I think for us to make it into rooms like these, we've all had a Miss Emma in our lives. She was one of the women who helped raise me. She didn't have any children of her own, yet every child in our church belonged to Miss Emma. She corrected us, she challenged us, she had high expectations for us and from us, and because she believed our future was her responsibility. Dean McLeod. I attended Washington University in St. Louis because of a gentleman named Dean McLeod. He was one of my college mentors, and he did something very similar to Miss Emma years later. He cared enough to look past what I was accomplishing to focus on what I was capable of becoming. Different people, different generations, but same principle. Somebody showed up. And because someone showed up for me, I found myself showing up for others. The youth serving workforce, in my mind, exists because that pattern still matters. In fact, I would argue, as Carolyn said, it matters more today than ever. There's a term that we hear thrown about, everyone's afraid of, AI, artificial intelligence, it's looming around every corner. I say, what concerns me most isn't artificial intelligence. It's loneliness. It's disconnection. The growing number of young people who are searching for belonging and struggling to find it. We're raising a generation that's more connected digitally than any generation in human history, and yet many young people report feeling increasingly isolated and alone. They're searching for purpose and community, for people who know their name and their story and care whether they succeed. As I researched Too Precious to Lose, I spent years talking with elders. I sat down with almost 80 elders in my community, and they didn't have better times than we have today. Many faced segregation, many faced discrimination, many faced economic hardship, but they rarely faced those challenges alone. They had churches and neighbors and mentors and civic institutions that helped them carry their load. They belonged somewhere. And I sometimes wonder if that's one of the things that we've lost. Not our capacity for connection, but some of the structures that made connection more possible. The youth serving workforce is one of the sectors intentionally rebuilding that sense of belonging. Every mentor, every tutor, every coach, every after-school teacher, and every service coordinator, they're doing more. You're doing more than delivering a program. You're helping a young person answer one of the most important questions in life. Do I matter here? Do I belong? And that matters because talent has never been the scarce resource. Opportunity is scarce. Access is scarce. Relationships are scarce. But I believe that talent is evenly distributed. Opportunity isn't. I spent years building a company called SkillSmart, focused on understanding and valuing the skills that people possess. At its core was a simple belief that we should value skills regardless of where they're learned. Too often we treat learning that happens in classrooms as somehow more legitimate than learning that happens in communities. But we would think about the learning that a volunteer coach would experience. We would think about what a camp counselor learns. We would think about what a mentor learns, about what a youth serving worker learns: communication, leadership, budgeting. Lord, does the youth serving workforce know how to stretch a dollar? Relationship building, learning conflict resolution. Some of the most important skills in our economy are developed while helping other people grow. Yet we've often struggled to recognize them and to value them. The youth serving workforce doesn't just prepare young people for the future, it prepares the workforce itself. Because the people doing this work are developing exactly the kind of human skills that become more valuable in this rapidly changing world. The value is here. The question is whether society is willing to see it. One of my favorite stories in the book, Too Precious to Lose, involves the Quince Orchard students that I mentioned to you. What moved me wasn't simply that they cared, it was that most of them had no personal connection to the history that I was telling them. They weren't preserving their birthright story, yet they chose to carry the story anyway. They chose to invest in a community that wasn't theirs. Or perhaps more accurately, they chose to make it theirs. That's what belonging looks like. Community isn't only something that we're born into. Sometimes it's something we choose. And every day, youth-serving professionals help young people make that choice. One of the lessons I learned in writing is that communities are built when people decide something is more important than getting credit for. The people who built my home community of Quince Orchard didn't agree on everything. The people who saved that physical space of Pleasant View didn't agree on everything, but they agreed on what was worth saving. And that's what made the difference. My grandmother would have never described herself as part of a youth-serving workforce. She would have laughed at the phrase. She simply believed that if you cared about your community, you showed up, you served, you invested in people, and you brought someone along. The youth-serving workforce is not just preparing young people for jobs, it's preparing young people for citizenship, for leadership, for responsibility, for community, for the moment when they stop asking, who's going to help, and start asking, how can I help? And I think that matters because of the moment we're living through. The ground beneath us is literally shifting. Technology is reshaping work. Trust is declining. Many young people are trying to figure out who they are and where they belong in a world that often feels fragmented and unsettled. And if that's true, then this work is not peripheral, it's foundational. For too long, we thought about this work as if it sits downstream from the real issues, from the workforce, from the economy, from the democracy, from the belonging, from the civic trust work. But the truth is, this work sits upstream from all of them. And if that's true, then we have to realize that none of us can do it alone. Not a single organization, not a single sector, not a single institution. The challenges facing young people are simply too big and too interconnected, which means our willingness to work together may be just as important as the work itself. Because every one of those outcomes begins with the young person, and every young person is shaped by whether someone chooses to show up. Now, looking around this room and on Zoom, I see people who show up. I see people who build belonging. I see people who create opportunity and who help young people discover that they matter. I believe history will look back on work like yours and recognize it for what it truly was. Not a side project, not an enrichment activity, not an add-on, but one of the essential investments we made in the future. We must recognize that this isn't just an era of change, it's a change of era. And moments like this demand that we stop thinking smaller than the moments demand. The future won't be built by technology alone. It won't be built by markets alone. It won't be built by institutions alone. It will be built by people, people who help the next generation discover that they matter. People like the ones in this room, people like you. Now, I said earlier that the future won't be built by institutions alone. It'll be built by people. And the question before us now is how we strengthen and support the people doing that work every day. I have the great pleasure of introducing our next panel. And I think there are a few people who have spent more time thinking about this question than Dr. Aisha Boyce. As Associate Director for Strategic Partnerships and Professor at Arizona State University, Aisha has become one of the country's leading voices on how we evaluate, strengthen, and improve programs that create opportunity. Her work is rooted in a simple but powerful belief. If we want better outcomes for young people, we have to better understand, support, and invest in the people who serve them. Dr. Boyce brings together research, practice, and partnership in a way that helps us move beyond good intentions and toward lasting impact. She's exactly the person we need to guide this next conversation, and I ask that you join me in welcoming Dr. Aisha Boyce and our distinguished panel. Thank you so much. Dr. Boyce?
Okay, I will invite our panelists, Jennifer Bronson. We have Jill Koyama on Zoom and Tay Moore up to the front of the room, please. Our first panel explores three critical interconnected themes. The first is a need to think about educators more broadly, including those working across learning settings. The second theme is about how engaging as a participant in and/or a worker in a youth-serving workforce prepares you for work in a variety of settings. The third is the return on investment of youth-serving programs, specifically high-impact tutoring. And so we'd like to begin by having each panelist describe their role and how they are engaged in this work. I think we'll start with Jill. Best laid plans. She's supposed to be here, but we couldn't get her here due to thunderstorms and flyovers and everything like that. And so we'll have Jill begin, then we'll go to Tay and Jennifer to spend just a few minutes describing your role and how you're engaged in this work.
Thank you, Aisha. And again, I apologize that I am not there and apologize even more that I'm up on that ginormous screen. It's really been my pleasure to work with Carolyn and Aisha to bring people from Mary Lou Fulton College and youth serving workforce together so that we can explore what's possible if we put our strengths into conversation and collaboration. I am currently fortunate to be trusted to lead one of our two divisions in our college. And our division defies what most people consider education or colleges of education. We're not teacher preparation, but I think of us more as education enhancers and educator accelerators. I have an active imagination, so we offer 36 different programs and certificates, mostly at the graduate level. And these include certificates to help people who are already in a profession, such as a youth serving workforce, to gain further skills and knowledges, and then also degrees that support them in charting their careers and their lives and their families' lives. So we have public facing offerings that can then lead into academic program. And we're currently exploring opportunities to have credit for learning and knowledge building within work. So for me, this has been a lifelong endeavor, and that I am the product of a lot of different people and places that we're talking about now as youth serving. I spent most of my childhood in those places. They meant a lot to me. The people were important to me. And although I work in the academy now, I've always worked across sectors and believe strongly that education just happens everywhere. So I feel really honored to be part of this group. I thank Carolyn and Aisha and the advisory board. I haven't met smarter people. Thank you, Aisha.
Well, good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? All right. Well, good afternoon, y'all. It's great to be here. My name is Tay Moore. I'm a research and policy associate with the Aspen Institute in the Education and Society program. So our work focuses on convening leaders across practice and policy and across the entire political spectrum to improve the public education experience for K-12 students here in the country. But also I do work supporting the Center for Rising Generations, which is a new endeavor at Aspen that's ensuring that civic engagement, civil dialogue, and leadership development become predictable parts of a young person's trajectory and their experience growing up. And my first, I guess, experience with the positive youth development sector was through 4-H. It was the only club offered at my school. And I'd go on to be involved in the program both locally, but also on the state level. I'm serving on the National 4-H Young Alumni Advisory Committee, and most recently serving on the National 4-H Council Board of Trustees. And so it's been a great, I guess, experience seeing the youth serving workforce, not only as someone who's benefited from it, but being a part of the workforce and then on the strategic level as well. So this work is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm super excited to be here today.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Bronson. I am very privileged to serve as the Managing Director of Learning Programs at Accelerate. We are a national education nonprofit that makes grants at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. I myself am a former teacher, a recovering lawyer, and served as the chief of staff for a school district, and am also, like probably most everyone in this room, the beneficiary of some youth serving programs from my own youth. I grew up in the Scouts, for instance, so really happy to be here today on behalf of the advisory board. So at Accelerate, I'll just say a little more about the work that we do there. We make grants to fund the implementation of programs in schools. And then alongside those implementations, we also fund the research to understand what's working. And then we work closely with states to help them adopt policy where those interventions that do work for students can be adopted at scale. And how this relates to the youth serving workforce is that we've studied very closely high dosage tutoring as well as some AI and ed tech interventions. But the people that power those interventions are themselves the youth serving workforce, and that's college students, AmeriCorps members, paraprofessionals. And so we really are focusing, for instance, on how, as Jason said in his opening remarks, the youth serving workforce really knows how to stretch a dollar. At Accelerate, we're talking a lot about making sure that often scarce resources in education are being allocated towards the things that we know work, and then supporting the people that are powering those interventions. And so that's what brings me to the work today.
So as you can all tell, we have a very experienced panel. Thank you so much to Jason for introducing me. I'll just note that this work aligns closely with my own commitments to culture responsive evaluation and to understanding how systems can be designed to expand opportunity. So we have a little bit of time to chat with our panelists. And so my first question is for Tay. Jason spoke about the critical skills that individuals acquire through engagement with youth serving with the youth serving workforce. Could you share a bit more about your experience with this critical sector and how your engagement with it over time has supported your professional skill development and growth?
Sure thing. Well, I'll start by saying, I would not be half of the man I am today if it had not been for this workforce. And primarily very similar to, the stories that Jason shared. He grew up in rural Northwest Louisiana and was raised in part by my great grandparents. And so that invisible youth serving workforce, the people who would laugh at the term, the non-academics, those individuals that I like, the village, they just stood in the gap because it was the right thing to do. And so I had that extremely, rich formative experience growing up in this multi-generational family unit. But I was introduced to the formal youth serving workforce for the first time as a fourth grader. 4-H was the only club that was offered at my rural elementary school. I went to the same school from the time I started as a 4-year-old until I graduated in 12th grade. And we were all in the same building. And I'll never forget, the teacher saying, the 4-H agent's coming today. You will join 4-H, and if you don't have the $7, I will gladly pay for it. Upon reflection, she just wanted a planning period. But that was probably the most transformative $7 that's ever been spent as I reflect upon everything that I've been able to accomplish so far. And so this workforce, in the beginning, it really helped me gain all of those durable skills that Jason mentioned earlier: critical thinking, leadership development, public speaking, collaboration. I was so nervous, so anxious as a child and afraid to public speak. And I can remember us driving one day to a state 4-H conference for me to give a speech, and I threw up in my 4-H agent's car. And what did she do? She stopped on the side of the road, got a napkin, we wiped it up, she gave me Gatorade, and she still made me go and compete in that competition. And I'm thankful for Miss Karen, because she believed in me and saw in me these traits that I didn't see in myself. The same thing with collaboration. As a high school student, we would, as a state 4-H officer, we would plan these leadership development camps, 3-day camps, for our peers. And so I learned those skills as budgeting, all those things before I even graduated high school. And I graduate high school and start college, and I was trying to remember today, the first time I filled out a tax document, and I believe it was to sign up to be a summer camp worker. And I spent all of my summers throughout college working summer camps, and I would go back to college many times hearing, all these stories from folks who had these grand internships. They were doing amazing things. They're like, what did you do? I played in the dirt, that's what I did. I helped a kid stop crying, that's what I did. We see it that way, but upon reflection, that workforce and those experiences can transform the trajectory of a young person's life. And so I joined the youth serving workforce, and after winning the Truman Scholarship, I ended up here in DC after college, and I applied to lots of different internships, working in government, and none of them would hire me. Not to speak badly of the government, but none of them would hire me, and I ended up getting this job at Levine Music, which is one of the largest community music schools in the country. It's based here in DC. And I was the assistant site director for the summer music camp in Southeast DC, down at the Ark in Anacostia. And I got down there, and I was kind of disappointed because I'm in DC, I want to work for the government or some huge nonprofit, doing policy work. But no, I ended up working at this summer camp for disadvantaged kids down in Southeast. And I'll be doggone it, as I'm working this camp, I'm taken back in the nation's capital. I'm taken back to Ringo, Louisiana, where I received my first piano lessons in an after-school program. And it all made sense in that moment. Oh, I understand why I'm here now. I understand that it's not just about, these prestigious roles that we have, this great work, these large institutions, but that experience that we can give a young person that changes their trajectory. And so the workforce has played a huge role in my development. I've also been a part of that, and instilling that in the next generation that's below me, I guess Generation Alpha now. But I've seen, the way that it not only has these personal benefits, but also as an economic driver. And I think that's not talked about enough. For many young people, their first jobs come through those experiences, interacting with this workforce. And that should be noted for. They are the frontline workers, in a sense, I guess you could say. They stand in the gap, and they help bridge this civic divide. And all of the skills that business, at the end of the day, business, all these reports are coming out from business leaders on the skills that young people need to be, successful. These durable skills, critical thinking, even in this AI revolution, well, how do they gain those skills? Many times it's the experiences that they have with the youth serving workforce. I'm a testament of that. My first opportunities to travel were through 4-H club, so first time being on an airplane was through first time meeting other people from other parts of the country. If Raj Chetty's research says that the number one predictor of social mobility is economic connectedness, the ability for young people to create these relationships with other folks who aren't from their same community, who aren't from their same background, then we need to think about, how can we increase access to those experiences, and where do those experiences happen? Who are the individuals that ensure those experiences happen? And all of that goes back to the youth serving workforce.
Okay, my next question is for Jennifer. Accelerate is helping to build a strong evidence base for high impact tutoring. Could you share more about what you're learning in terms of the impact of high impact tutoring?
Yes, I'd love to. So you have all likely heard of high impact or high dosage tutoring post-pandemic, and that's because it does have the most robust evidence base of the interventions that are out there and available to us in the K-12 system. For instance, last year, Accelerate's grantees that implemented their programs with Fidelity saw anywhere between 1.5 to 15 months of additional learning take place for their students. So it really does have a very strong evidence base. And part of that is because we're seeing that it's an extremely resilient intervention. And by that, I mean across grades, across subject areas, across modality, if it's delivered virtually or in person, it's producing outcomes for students. And for instance, virtual tutoring has really turned the corner from promising to now really proven. But very interestingly, tutor type doesn't seem to have a hold, or doesn't seem to be a gatekeeper to student outcomes. So if a tutor is coming in that's not credentialed, they're a high school student or a college student, they are still able to produce meaningful student outcomes. And in one RCT, one randomized controlled trial that we funded, the less credentialed tutors actually outperformed the more credentialed tutors. And the speculation there was that they're more willing to stick to the script, and with the right supports, the right training, the right materials, they are able to be very impactful tutors. And one story, one anecdote that I'll share, and this goes back to a lot of the things that Tay said about his own experience interacting with the youth serving workforce and then himself becoming part of that workforce, is that I went and observed a tutoring program that was driven by high school students, and they would walk down the hill literally to the elementary school where most of them had attended, and tutor the elementary school students there. And so I observed the program, and then we ran a focus group. And they were telling me all about the experience. And some of them said, because of the experience, I feel strongly that I want to go into education, which is great because now they already have experience with relationship building. They know how to manage a group and behaviors. And for the educators in the room, they also have some exposure to the science of reading, which never hurt. But some of them also said, this is not for me. Like, I have learned that this is not what I want to do, which is great because they've developed that self-knowledge and, as Tay mentioned, the transferable skills that they can take to other sectors.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jennifer. Just a quick follow-up question. How should leaders think about the return high dosage tutoring delivers, both for students and the broader system?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would think about it on two levels. The first, of course, obviously, is the student that's benefiting from the tutoring. But then I'd also encourage leaders to think about the next layer of return that they're getting. For instance, the classroom teacher, if there's a high schooler that's walking down the hill to provide tutoring for a small group, that lightens his or her load. It also helps reinforce some of the things that he or she has been teaching to the whole group. It also develops the tutor, as I said, in their transferable skills. And then more largely, and I think this is the one where we often overlook the return, is to the K-12 system at large and the community system. For instance, now that tutor has a meaningful pathway potentially to teach at that school. They've had exposure to the curriculum. And so I would encourage leaders to think about the multi-tiers of return that they would get on the investment of developing that tutor as part of the youth serving workforce. So it's not just an engine for academic outcomes, but also economic ones. And I would also just add that so much of what I'm saying is also true for sports coaches or out of school time providers. So this doesn't just apply to tutors. And then to pivot to a more technical interpretation of ROI, this is a little bit trickier to pin down. Those of you that have worked in K-12 systems know that very rigorous cost analysis information is not always readily available for all of these interventions. At Accelerate, we're trying to change that. We've developed a cost tool we are now requiring our grantees to complete as part of the implementation that they do with us. So then we can actually see dollar for dollar how many months of learning we are going to gain for that investment. And it allows for an apples to apples comparison across the interventions that a principal or a district leader might be considering. But I will say, and just as a closing thought, for the interventions where we do have cost analysis information available, 90% plus or minus of the cost is the people that are powering these interventions. So just once again, I would say that is a testament to how important it is for us to support and provide coaching and training, ongoing just investment in the youth serving workforce.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. One thing that strikes me about you and Tay's comments is that when we think about the youth serving workforce, it's made of a lot of different members. You have tutors, you have coaches, you have instructors. And so, but also all of these people can be really thought of as educators. And so I'd like to turn to Jill to ask you, when people hear the term educator, they often think only of classroom teachers. So how and why is the Mary Lou Fulton College refining this term?
Thanks, Aisha, and thanks, Jennifer and Tay. So I'm a cultural anthropologist, and so I was trained that education never equals schooling, and educator is not synonymous with teacher, and learner is not necessarily the same thing as students. And that's all in line with the way our college thinks. So at Mary Lou Fulton College, we take human design and futures possibility approaches, and starting with the reality of what is. And the reality that formal schooling only works for some students. And we know it's historically worked for those same students, and that learning and education happens everywhere. And so when we look at the possibilities, we're not looking for a singular solution. In fact, I don't believe we think there is a singular solution. And in that looking, we see that educators are not confined to schools or any other formal learning context. So with my work with refugees and immigrants, I've spent time with hundreds of learners and their families. And we talk about when they're learning, with whom they're learning, where they learn, and they rarely say classroom. But that's a little bit sad, but once in a while they will mention a favorite teacher or counselor or something. But they learn from kin, they learn from friends, they learn from football teammates, they learn from community center staff, they learn on the playground, from television, from social media, and they also teach themselves. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, Miss, I taught myself this or that. Maybe that's one reason I work with them, because no matter how old I get, they still call me Miss. But joking aside, this is important because we as adults can create all kinds of contexts in which learners fail. We are really good at it. But our superpower can also be that we create contexts in which learners engage and thrive, feel seen, are safe, where they can learn with each other, where they can teach themselves, where they can teach others. And I think one thing that gets in our way of thinking about these contexts is the binaries of school, after school, curricular, extracurricular. These are false and dangerous binaries that position schooling against much of what many of you here do and the youth serving workforce, and what many of us have had in our life that have made us who we are. And like Jennifer said, made us want to go lean into education. And so I think we can avoid this if we quit focusing on these boundaries between different contexts and start focusing on the learners as they move through the context and experiences they have in them and across them, and see it all as cumulative. It's all needed. It is what we have the responsibility, I think, to do for children and all learners. And that is our commitment to our society, to our democracy, to the well-being of our planet. And I may have gone over there, Aisha, but thank
No,
you.
this is perfect. Thank you. So we're just about out of time for this panel, but I do have one final question, which I'm hoping each of you can answer in about a minute. Maybe we'll go backwards. So we'll start with Jill, go to Jennifer, and then Tay, let you have the last word. If you could change one thing tomorrow, whether it's policy, funding, preparation, or public perception, to strengthen the youth serving workforce, what would it be? And so maybe we'll start with Jill and work our way backwards.
One thing, I would like to change the way people think about youth serving workforce, about 4-H, about Boys and Girls Clubs, about the Ys, about the community centers, about religious organizations. I want them to think differently about who is there working as educators and who it's serving. And then I hope with that, then that would change policy and funding and so forth. But we have to get out of our myopic thinking about these places are just for those kids who don't have something else to do at home.
I'll echo what Jill said. I want us to change the way that we're thinking about the youth serving workforce. And in that, I would recommend that we talk about the return on our investment differently. So every dollar that's invested in the youth serving workforce is also an investment in children. It's also an investment in the community. And so I think we should start measuring that and change the discourse around how we talk about these investments and what, as a community, as what we are getting back for those investments.
And I think we have to, after having this perception change, we have to treat the youth serving workforce as the profession, and I say that word, profession, that it is. It's not a stopgap job. It's not, everything else wasn't working out, so I'm just going to do this thing. It's not just the individuals who entertain children or just provide, their fundamental needs. It's critical economic and civic infrastructure, and we have to see it that way. We have to invest in it that way, and treat it, for this like critical role that it plays in society. We can't sustain ourselves as a country. We can't sustain ourselves as a world moving forward if the next generation isn't prepared. And who are the individuals that prepare those young people every day? The youth serving workforce.
Let's give a round of applause for it. We are getting ready to transition to our next panel. I'll begin by introducing the panel moderator. Carolyn Traeger-Kleiman is an AmeriCorps alum and military spouse with a deep commitment to elevating the role of the youth serving workforce in driving economic, civil, and educational vitality in communities across the United States. For more than 20 years, she has worked across education and workforce practice, policy, research, and strategic identity. She began her own career as a service learning educator, working with hundreds of New York City public schools. She's leveraged that practitioner experience to shape education and national services fellow policy as a fellow in the U.S. Senate Help Committee. Carolyn and I have the great pleasure to be able to work on this initiative together for the past 2 years, and I'm excited to turn this over to her to lead the next panel.
I would like to invite up Cameron Benham and Stephanie Wu, who will be joining me for this next conversation. Cameron and Stephanie, make yourselves comfortable. So I'm so excited to be joined by the two of you today. And before we get into introductions, just want to share a couple of notes, which is one of the reasons we wanted to have the two of you together is, Stephanie, in your work, you're thinking a lot about how AI-enabled tools can not only support the impact of the youth-serving workforce on learner outcomes, but also how using those tools can help members of the workforce develop some of those critical in-demand skills that Jason spoke about at the start of our session today. And Cameron, you and the team at Innovate EDU are doing phenomenal work thinking about AI safety and literacy, and also how we as consumers can understand what tools are supporting our learning, our cognitive abilities, and what tools might be eroding them. So excited to be sitting with the two of you today. Stephanie, may I turn to you first to introduce yourself, your organization, and your connection to this work?
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you for having this forum. Stephanie Wu, I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at City Year, which is a national youth service program whose participants work full-time in schools, supporting students who are they're off track to graduating, and so supporting them in staying on track to graduation. our members, we call the role, they're very much like a new kind of education practitioner that the previous panelist, Jennifer, talked about. We call them student success coaches, and they're providing whole school culture services, student engagement services, after-school programs, as well as in-classroom instruction. My role is to help develop those student-facing services, as well as develop the leadership development program for our practitioners who are delivering those services to the young people, as Carolyn mentioned.
I am? Nice. I'm Cameron Benham, Policy Associate at Innovate EDU. Jason said this earlier, and I literally wrote this down. It's funny that he said it. Do whatever Carolyn tells you to do. And so very thankful and thrilled to be here. We work with ASU, MLFC so often, and so very thankful to be here. I wanted to bring up something, how I come to this work. Tay kind of mentioned when he, moving to DC, you have these aspirations of working in policy or politics. I went to American University, not far from here, wanted to do political strategy. Didn't want to run for office, but I really was like really interested in the nitty gritty of strategy. And if you know anything about American, everyone there wants to be president. And so I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I had a very transformative experience at a federal work study program called Kid Power Inc., where I was an after-school teacher, fourth grade after-school teacher. I got to work with kids hands-on every day after class. I would go straight to J.O. Wilson in Northeast, which I ironically live near by now, and would work with students on, it wasn't just like after-school homework. It was like gardening. It was like holistic health. It was like hygiene. It was very basic things that you don't really think about when you think about an after-school program. You really just think about it as a daycare, but this was really like a whole holistic support. And so that really changed my experience. I did that for 2 years, and then I changed my degree to be more focused on education, state and education policy, and at American. Over the last 5 or 6 years or so, I've been really working on education technology, which ultimately led me to working at Innovate EDU as a policy associate, working across, trying to advance policy across our 7 or so projects. And 3 of them really wanted to mention that we're really focused on right now that relates to this work is one, our partnership for student success that is run out of Johns Hopkins University that really focuses, it's partners with groups like Accelerate and others that focuses on education, national service, tutors, mentors, et cetera. They recently published the paper Powering Workforce Resilience in the Age of AI that kind of talks about the answer to the AI displacement or replacement of workers is more a revisioning of national service and getting young people into these national service roles. Second, I wanted to mention our Pathways Alliance, which works on education and preparation programs, partners with state education agencies, local education agencies, workforce development boards, higher education institutions to train the next generation of teachers. And then lastly, most related to this, in my opinion, is our EdSafe AI Alliance. We work with 10 states and 17 school districts across the country on scaling their AI literacy programs. We also work with 3 international fellowships, training the educators and youth serving workforce of tomorrow on basic AI literacy skills, and then they can then relay that to their students. And then lastly, our task forces, which I know we'll get into, that really focuses on different types of issues. We had one earlier this year about AI chatbots and companions and how to talk about that in a safe way in education. And then we have one right now talking about future-proofing human flourishing, which is most related to this work. It talks about, assessing generative AI tools for learning sciences for students.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. Really appreciate those introductions and the great connections you've made to not only this panel, but the prior panel as well. Stephanie, I'd love to start with you. So for decades, City Year has been one of the premier youth development programs in this country. And over those decades, the organization has artfully pivoted to meet the moment. So I'm curious for my first question for you, how are you thinking about this moment of AI transformation? What types of AI-powered tools are you using in your work? And how, if at all, is this moment affecting how you are thinking about not only core member development, critical skill development, durable skill development, but also the skills that they seek to support in the learners they serve?
That's a lot in that question. All right, meeting the moment with AI. We have recently made a decision that we will remain practitioner-led, and it's good. The technology at a leadership level forced us to step back and make sure that we weren't just all in on AI because we were being affected by a lot of the macro conversations that are going on around it. And we just re-anchored ourselves, and we have always been about bringing developmental processes and caring for the social and emotional journey of young people alongside and as a co-equal to the academic journey, and that we would remain rooted in positioning developmental processes and stances in the academic setting, and that we would use AI only to promote that developmental, relationship centered approaches. So we learned a lot of that. We were able to have that conversation because we did 2 very hands-on pilots. And I won't go into both of the pilots, but we stayed very focused that the pilots would be driven by what our practitioners and our student success coaches needed in the schools and what were their pain points, not what the ed tech industry, and I love the ed tech industry, but we have really as a guardrail for ourselves. It's not what they're telling us it's for. We have to solve what our practitioners need using the technology. And one thing is time. And our student success coaches are 18 to 26 years old. They provide a lot of value in the schools. We have evidence that shows that our students who are with student success coaches make academic gains and social emotional development progress. But they are doing double time in learning how to do lesson planning, learning how to work with teachers, developing their after-school programs. And so we used an AI literacy tool in our San Jose program because there are a lot of ed tech firms there that were very interested in working with us because we can get the tools into the schools. That is a problem that the schools are having. They don't know how to find time for the tools. So if you have these different practitioners who can help them understand how to create the space for the tool, that is something that is a need when it comes to this work. At any rate, our practitioners found 75% more time saved. They had more time that was not spent lesson planning, and they channeled that time into their student relationships. And it was a reciprocal effect there because the more time they had to work with the students and practice the skills and facilitate group activities in terms of applying the skills that they were using in discussion, they then channeled that into the lesson planning that they were using with AI. And they didn't just use the AI to generate what intervention should I do. They actually changed the intervention. So they started to create reading passages that had sometimes the names of the students in the reading passages. They appropriately positioned experiences the students were sharing, that they were having socially in the passages, and the kids became so engaged in their literacy context. So it was an interesting way because the tech firm realized how the relationships needed to become part of the tool that they were developing, and they started to change. They were designing their tool. The types of tools that we're focused on right now are practitioner tools that do those kinds of things, help them do their relational and developmental work better, make sure that they can really have time to have meaning-making conversations with the students, making sure that the tools foster feelings of belonging, voice, and make time for the students to reflect and have dialogue with each other. We'll probably lean more into, we already facilitate a lot of group conversation as part of our learning approaches. But now we'll probably lean into dialogic reasoning processes and start to borrow a lot more from inquiry-based learning and incorporate that as part of our practitioners' skill sets. So I think there's a lot of potential here. I'll name one other thing. You got a sense there, the kind of skill development that we'll do as student success coaches too. But our practitioners came in skeptical of using AI, which won't be a surprise. But all of them left the experience much more open to AI as a tool. And it's because they were working with teachers and with City Year as an organization who was advancing first the developmental approaches and not just using the tool for the sake of using the tool. So I think, personally, I reflect on, I never engaged in social media, didn't like it when it first came out. And that influenced me professionally too, in terms of the decisions that we made around how we were going to recognize social media. And I'm not going to make that mistake personally this time. I want to get involved with the technology. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. And Cameron, as we turn to you, Stephanie reminded us of how important it is to really think about AI-enabled tools as a tool, and that so much learning happens through relationship, through practitioners. So I'm curious to understand more about what you're doing at Innovate EDU to ensure that tools are not only safe, but also are designed to do just what Stephanie described.
Yeah, I mean it's the golden goose. It's the big question. The EdSafe AI line centers all of our work around our SAFE framework for safe, accountable, fair, and efficacious use of AI in education. So no matter what we're doing, we're always talking about those 4 pillars, whether that's in our policy lab, fellowships, or task forces. We had our AI literacy blueprint last year that kind of talked about how to scale AI literacy K through 12, recommendations for teachers, policymakers, et cetera, some of which have been picked up in legislation. Most recently, as I mentioned earlier, we had our future proofing human flourishing task force. It's kind of a mouthful, but we kind of grapple with this question of what does human flourishing look like with artificial intelligence? Because right now, as Jason mentioned, a lot of children in particular are outsourcing their cognitive development, their mental health resources, their just companionship just to artificial intelligence. I think the Center for Democracy and Technology said 85% of children are using artificial intelligence now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And the number one reason is for companionship. So, and mental health, that can include mental health support, that can just be looking for a friend. And so how do we use in that? I think that's a double pronged issue. I think it's an issue of lack of access to companions in their life, but also the problem with the technology itself is building the sycophancy where it kind of holds you in and it reaffirms your beliefs and et cetera. So back to the task force, we partnered with ASU MLFC. We brought 50 ed tech developers, AI developers, workforce development boards, learning scientists, national security experts to kind of think about what human flourishing in the age of AI means. And we kind of came up with this definition that we think human flourishing as a tool or a co-pilot for students' learning, development, and self-directed agency, allowing them to kind of choose their own path, to give them options, to give them opportunities for economic mobility, and so on and so forth. Now we're preparing to release a white paper. We basically put together this white paper that establishes the learning sciences benchmark. So right now, there's no benchmark for how AI supports human flourishing. There's a benchmark called Cora it talks about like child safety more generally, but there's no metric for evaluating AI tools to actually support learning. And so as more and more schools bring in artificial intelligence tools into their classrooms and they procure more and more tools, we want to make sure that they are actually supporting learning, whether that's in or out of school, because a lot of the students are using them on their school's issued devices or software out of school. And so ultimately, we came up with 15 domains across 3 pillars. Our pillars are cognitive foundations, pedagogical design, measurement, accountability. We think these three kind of cover both like the social emotional development aspect and the learning aspect of what we envision generative AI tools doing. And then we also hope that this benchmark kind of sends a signal to the industry. Hey, you need to do better about your tools. We cannot have any more children becoming literally addicted to your tool and then it leading to self-harm or even suicide. And so we hope this sends a signal. We developed criteria for across the three pillars. We hope that these tools foster durable skills, as was mentioned earlier, like critical thinking, metacognition, inquiry-based problem solving. We have the cognitive alignment and metacognition problem, fostering critical thinking, deep dialogue and problem solving, and the human connection piece, emphasizing that humans are in the loop and you're still, emphasizing that relationships are so key to any child's life. Obviously, our safe framework, as I mentioned earlier, and then universal by design, making sure that all these tools are as accessible as possible to every learner. Granted, most of them are free now, but that doesn't mean that they're free. We call it the freemium. It means like you're getting less features, you're getting less accurate tools, you're getting less just performing tools because they are free. And we don't think that's acceptable just because that inherently creates a socioeconomic divide. And so we hope that this benchmark kind of sends a clear signal to the field that like, hey, you guys need to do better, that generative AI tools used in education should be aligned to the learning sciences and evidence-based practices for learning. And that, maybe this will increase policy. Maybe this will go into, there's a lot of whispers down the street on like having some sort of mechanism for evaluating AI tools, but we hope this sends a signal more broadly to the general field that we need tools that enhance student learning in the learning sciences rather than diminishes it.
Excellent. Thank you, Cameron. And I'm curious, Stephanie, having heard everything Cameron shared, and this real movement to think about AI tools in the context of what we know about learning science. I'm curious, as you think about the AmeriCorps members you work with, you think about the city year staff, you think about the young people you all are seeking to serve in this era of AI transformation. How should we be thinking about new ways of approaching skill development? How should we be thinking about new entry points into the workforce? And what, if anything, should we be doing to really ensure that ed tech companies and other employers are creating those pathways?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think practical, relevant uses of the AI tool is the most valuable thing for young people who are just kind of entering their launch years, if you will. And doing that, like I said, in the context of values-based organizations. That would be a critical thing. We are looking at different, we are looking to provide a credential to all of our members who go through City Year each year. And I am really struck by how there's a lot of theoretical credentialing out there. And I'm just looking for, I'd rather have something that doesn't promise a lot but is very practical with regards to what the core members need to know. That's what we call our student success coaches. So that's one thing that we're thinking about when it comes to skill development is how is it practical and relevant to what you are going to need to know during your service year? Let's see. What's the other thing? I have noticed that there is more skepticism and almost resistance now when we bring up using AI than when we started our pilots, which was only 2 years ago. So I am experiencing the tech backlash like in real time. And so we are having to also adjust like our leadership orientation and how we're really going to position ethical use with our members. And they're also coming in a lot more savvy and understanding and asking, is this large language model closed or open? Which provider is City Year using? There are a lot of feelings about that. So I'm just naming that like this is unfolding in real time.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I'll turn to you, Cameron, which is Stephanie City Year has been very intentional about career pathways for AmeriCorps members for a long time. Are you developing any new or different pathways or thinking about that in a different way now? Or are you staying with what's worked in the past?
Yes, we believe that National Youth Service is a workforce development pathway, which is a new way of understanding National Youth Service as part of the infrastructure. So that's key. And some movement that we've had in that is that a National College Credit Services Board has just given us conditional approval for 10 college credits, which combined with some other benefits that we have, a young person can graduate from a year of service and have college credit as part of what they leave with. I think it's only the beginning because the skills that you can learn during a year of full-time service are just they're just so enormous. Cognitive, leadership, interpersonal, all of it. We have a teacher pathway. 6,000 alum are serving as public school teachers. 86% of them persist more than 3 years in the classroom. That compares to 50% nationally who persist 3 years and then leave. So and it's for the reasons that Jennifer mentioned. They get exposure to the profession and they know whether or not they want to enter it. But we're also looking at other pathways, apprenticeship programs.
Amazing. And Cameron, I'd like you to answer my question, and I'm going to be a very difficult moderator and add a nuance if that's okay, which is you spend a lot of time working with ed tech companies, working with youth serving organizations, working with districts. And so I'm curious, as you think about the youth serving workforce and really have a front row seat for the skills that are going to be required for the careers of the present and the future, how do you think engaging in the youth serving workforce uniquely prepares people for an AI infused economy and evolving career pathways?
I mean, I think it's what Stephanie mentioned, like the durable skills aspect, and going back to what Jason kind of led with is this idea of we have so much opportunity to connect with one another, but all our young people feel so lonely. I also think going back to the tech backlash that Stephanie mentioned, I think that young people are becoming, I have two younger sisters in middle school and high school, so they kind of keep me in touch. And they're like resistant to AI. Not that I thought they would be like all in, but they're like, one of them's an artist and she's like, the art stinks. It's AI slop. Like and so there's this resistance, and you saw it with the high school and college graduations the last couple of weeks. They're just literally booing their commencement speakers when they talk about AI, and it's hard not to blame them when the companies are saying you're going to be displaced or automated, or you're going to have to find new jobs. Stanford economist said that there's a 13% decline in quote AI exposed jobs for early career professionals. This is like software development, customer service, and admin roles as compared to other roles. And so we're already seeing the impacts. Combine that with what we're being told from the top down of you're going to have to change your career. You see a lot of this with CS majors. We really promised on CS, and now all of a sudden they're like, I don't have a job because AI can do it for me. And so reinforcing this spirit of national service, youth serving workforce, finding alternative ways to get into the workforce. Imagine if we had like something that could be using AI to connect people with credentials that they can They type in their interests and they're connected with credentials in their area that they can use to then get into the workforce and add to their resume. What we're hearing from employers on the workforce side of things, they're looking for students with the durable skills, the human skills, the critical thinking, metacognitive skills that they're not seeing currently with kids. And one of the things that we're really worried about with the future-proofing human flourishing workforce is this cognitive outsourcing, where students are not going through the practice, not going through the hard work that it takes to learn, and they're just kind of outsourcing it. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I have a younger sister who's guilty of it. Like everyone knows kind of someone who's guilty of it, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. And so reinforcing that human relationships are important, critical thinking and durable skills are still important no matter what the tool is. But how do we use artificial intelligence to kind of support those skill development? And in an age of human flourishing or whatever you want to call it, whether that's going to workforce, whether that's credentials, whether that's apprenticeships, there are different ways to kind of get into the workforce and get involved that is human centric rather than just like outsourcing it to a tool.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. I will name for the audience, I threw a couple curveballs in there for the panelists. So thank you for your grace, Stephanie and Cameron. As we close out today, a lightning question. One of the things that we are doing in this panel is we are reminding folks who are designing national talent strategies, rethinking workforce systems, rethinking federal workforce dollars, given the AI transformation upon us. We are encouraging them to include the youth-serving workforce and to acknowledge that the youth-serving workforce is positioned to be a critical partner in AI implementation. As we think about those leaders, as we think about the leaders in the room today and on Zoom, what is one key takeaway you want each person to walk away with? And what is one action you would like them to take? And so Cameron, I see you reaching for the mic. I'll turn to you.
I mean, it started with Jason. It was reinforced by the previous panel. I'm going to say it again. It's like the human relationship aspect is so often lost in this conversation. Like I mentioned the data earlier, students are using it for mental health services and companionship. That is, like I mentioned earlier, a two-pronged issue, that the tool is built to do that, but also that they have limited access to companionship or mental health resources. And so really need to think about this kind of AI transformation as a national security imperative. Tay kind of mentioned this earlier, but like seeing AI as a democratic, as an educational, and as a workforce issue. Because if we're not talking about these issues now, if we're not training and talking about AI as a scaffold for human flourishing, for social development, for cognitive development, for forming human relationships, we're just going to lose out. We're going to lose our civic engagement. We're going to lose our democracy. We're going to lose our economic talent, our workforce talent. And so thinking AI and talking about this conversation and reinvigorating the ideal of youth serving workforce in this age is so critical, so that we don't lose ourselves in this, so we don't lose our more and more children in this, so that the tools that we're using are built for learning, are built for human flourishing, not just automation and efficiency. And so could talk about this forever, but I think it's just like, again, going back to the human aspect of these tools and making sure that the humans stay at the center, and the center issue in all of this transformation is so vitally important.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Well, first, I'm just reflecting, Hannah, it's amazing that at the EdSafe Alliance and Innovate EDU is taking this on. You've already had a big influence. My takeaway would be that the AI firms are going to tell us a lot about they're going to acknowledge cognitive surrender. They're going to acknowledge cognitive offloading. Anthropic publishes their research, read it. It's public. And they are being very transparent about even the effects of AI on their own staff. Very insightful. So that would be one action. A takeaway I had from reading that is we in the youth serving workforce can do our own research. The technology is so new. It doesn't take really expensive studies. If you have access to data and a good question about your practitioners, and especially if it's related to some of this cognitive risk that Cam is mentioning, we can start studying it and learning it and developing insights as a sector that guides the policy making that organizations like CAMS are doing. So that would be both. That would be my. I do have one other action though, which is that we should all. I have found a lot of value in developing my own AI practice and being really reflective about that. And I've created, like, you know how people have book clubs. Some of my friends and I were just like part of it because we were really skeptical about it, but we also realized that we didn't pay attention to social media, and that turned out to be very harmful. So that would just be something else that I found super valuable because it's given me my own language professionally and personally in terms of being able to talk about AI. Like, I don't use human in the loop. It's not a bad term, but I consider more, oh, we need an AI assist here. Like, you just start to develop your own ideas and words, and we all need to be doing that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have time for one question from the room. Does anyone have a burning question that they want to pose? I was a teacher, no problem waiting.
Liz Looney, I think you were on the Zoom if you have a question.
I don't exactly have a question. Maybe something will come to me. But I just want to appreciate the thoughtfulness of the discussion around AI, because I find myself as someone who considers myself a late adopter of most technology. This is something that is popping up, and I think our local school district has also presented its strategic plan, which includes some goals around AI. So that's definitely whirling in my thinking. But I guess I wonder that, like, what are your thoughts about ways that school districts can and should be partnering with this need to have fluency in AI, both for educators and for students and learners, and balancing that with the growing concerns around the impact of screen time and technology on learners generally? Like, how are you having these conversations, or what do you hear coming from our more traditional education settings as well?
Thank you so much, Liz, for that great question. We're going to answer it in a second and go to Iris' question. You're okay? Okay, great. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, this is something we're constantly thinking with our school districts. We're seeing this huge ed tech backlash right now. We launched a task force on the PK5 ed tech work. Self plug, we have Policy Lab cohort 3 is open for application. So if you want to work with us, feel free to apply at edsafeaialliance.org. But we work through a policy stack. So that can be everything from a board statement to actual implementation and professional development plans. And so there's also plenty of federal dollars that have been opened up over the last couple of months from the Department of Labor, the allowance of using Perkins funds and WIOA funds and other federal funds, et cetera, to scale AI literacy, professional development, starting with your teachers and your administrators and kind of going downwards. And I think taking a very holistic, engaging your community, just being open and transparent about it. Because one of the big things that we see is the lack of trust in the tool. And, like, honestly, like I mentioned, rightfully so. And so really building that trust in your community members and getting full community buy-in is very key in scaling it for K-12 and how you deliberately carry that through into your curriculum.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you, Liz, for the question. Please join me in thanking Cameron and Stephanie for this rich dialogue.
Okay. Well, at the Mary Lou Fulton College, we aim to really be a world-class leader in advancing education across diverse settings. And as we have embarked on this work, I just want to note that in addition to convening and making space for conversations like this, we have two really important outcomes associated with this initiative that I just want to mention. The first is that we're working on an impact paper, impact of the youth serving workforce. And on, let's see here, September 16th here, there's more information that will be coming. We'll be hosting an event to talk a little bit about some of our findings of the impact of the youth serving workforce, including that it's an economic engine for communities, it creates pathways to opportunities, and it acts as a connective tissue. And then we'll be issuing a call for action. So look out for more information on that. We're also co-developing a micro certification for the youth serving workforce, and that's set to be released in spring 2027. So look forward to that as well for more information. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you'll continue to learn, build, and connect with us. Please visit our website. Also, if you're interested in joining the advisory board, please contact Carolyn as well. Let's see here. And you'll see more information up here. And then I just want to close with a few important thank yous. First, to our presenters and panelists, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. We truly appreciate you. So we'll give one more round of applause for our panelists. Second, to our Dean, Carol Basile, and the Mary Lou Fulton College faculty and staff who helped make this event possible here in DC and back in Arizona. And thank you to our inaugural members of our Youth Serving Advisory Board. So you heard from Jennifer, Tay, and Stephanie, as well as Jillian with the Center for Healing and Justice through Sport, Phil Robertson of the Forum of Youth Investment, Ray of Communities and Schools, and Ozzie Smith of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And finally, just thank you to each of you for spending some time braving the traffic to come down with us. And we hope that you have a good afternoon and evening. Please stay with us to connect a little bit, to mingle and have some snacks. Thank you all so much.